I will talk about the instrumentalization of belief. I will start with the first citation from Solzhenitsyn book, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. So what? Do you believe in God, Zhukov? And Zhukov answers, it's a question, quite astonished. When it thunders, try not to believe a little. So Ivan survived his 10 years of incarceration thanks to his strong will to fight against the dehumanization of the Gulag. To preserve his soul, he could only believe without questioning the nature of this belief. So I'm going to talk about believing first. What is it? What is the disenchantment of the world? How do we find belief in the public or non-religious spaces, like political, cultural, or ideological systems? So is it maybe it's patriotism, Bulgarian identity, or the collective political narrative that's become the text of the religion? So how belief is transformed and instrumentalized. And I don't think I will give examples from Lebanon, but maybe later we can talk about it. So what does it mean to believe? Linguistically, the distinction between the forms of belief is based on the prepositions that follow the verb. For example, when we say I believe in, then we have a religious belief in God. And I believe that, for example, I believe that it will rain, it's more like a preposition, proposition in French, like a sentence. This indicates that believing is a concept semantically affected by the preposition that follows it. The notion of believing is therefore dependent on the content of the letter. In the 18th century, Kant declined the belief Glaube to several degrees. He writes in, also Augustine talked about it before, but I'm talking about Kant. He wrote in Critique of Pure Reason that Fürwahrhalten, that means belief, or credence, can be opinion, Meinung, faith, Glauben, or knowledge, Wissen. So according to Kant, believing is an acceptance that is full from an affective or intuitive point of view, but questionable from an intellectual or logical point of view. That's to say, a consent that is not based only on rationality, but above all on a personal subjectivity. Then, in the 18th century, with the genesis of the philosophy of religion, Jean Grèche, according to Jean Grèche, belief took two forms: belief opinion and belief faith. Also, Francis Jacques, another French philosopher, wrote about belief opinion as a belief that. Belief opinion, it's an opinion, so I believe in that something will happen. It's a vision of the world that designates an involuntary disposition. As for the belief faith, it's a belief in. It's a matter of faith rather than opinion, and it can refer to authority, moral or religious or even political topic. So it's a voluntary aspect in that human being, and it can it's likely that I will attain salvation in my religious faith. But we can say that it's not really very separated, belief opinion and belief faith. They are not perfectly distinct. Believing that claims to be a profane, but it's also confused with the sacred belief. Because I can say, I believe that God exists. It's like I believe in God, so it's a little confusing. So, but I will move away from this confusion and I will concentrate on the believing in, the belief faith, taking into consideration that it could take other aspects, essentially religious. Okay? So how can belief continue to function outside spaces considered non-religious, for example, politics or sports? To better explain this, I will first address the concept of disenchantment that illustrates this in the so-called secular space. So let's take a closer look to the noun disenchantment, in German, Entzaubern, from entgötterte, which means having lost one's divinization. It was first used in the 18th century by the German poet Friedrich von Schiller. Max Weber then develops this in his work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, and he affirmed that disenchantment consists in an attitude of distancing oneself from the magical methods prescribed to attain salvation. So he writes that thus in the history of religions came to an end the vast process of disenchantment in Zauberung of the world, which had begun with the prophecies of ancient Judaism and which, in concert with Greek scientific thought, rejected all magical means of attaining salvation, as so many superstitions and sacrileges. So the disenchantment of the world seems to be at its peak in the most civilized societies. The science had allowed the human being to reject everything that was of the order of magic or superstition, and that was supposed to begin to bring him to salvation. So according to Weber, this was devaluated. So the sacrament, for example, the means of salvation, all this contributed to the word religious disenchantment. So this process, therefore, does not correspond to a particular period of history, but is part of the history itself of each religion. So each religion has this disenchantment in its history. This is, we can call it, so there is like pre or post disenchantment of each religion. Weber, nevertheless, observes that when the world is radically disenchanted from a political and religious point of view, the practice of asceticism within this same world nevertheless arises, even though human beings no longer rely on the magical powers of politicians or priests. So he gives the example of the Baptists that are involved in the professional world. It is in fact a psychological outcome remaining from the practice of asceticism. This observation implies that even if human beings flee from religious forms of belief, such as rituals and sacraments, they invest themselves consciously or unconsciously in other rituals inscribed within a specific time frame, such as work, sports, video games, or social networks. So it's another kind of belief and religious practice. Marcel Gauchet, the French historian and philosopher, distinguishes in this concept of disenchantment a phenomenon that affects the world and influences religion as an external factor. So believing is in the nature of human being and his mental functioning. According to him, democracy, sport, and human rights resemble articles of faith and dogmas, and are new instituted forms of belief. They can be reasons for blindness, irrationality, even fanaticism. Although the register of politics, sports, or human rights is not a religion because it's rather an ideology and cannot be identified with religious beliefs, as Gauchet writes, it nevertheless presents, in my opinion, analogies with religion such as dogma and article of faith. These common similarities reflect the institutional modalities of belief that characterize not only the religious institution, but also the institution of politics, sports, cinema, etc. So believing takes new forms that do not seem to be religious, but are nevertheless religious by analogy. They follow the religious pattern because human being deep down always needs belief. From a socio-historical point of view, we read in Mircea Eliade's The Sacred and the Profane, yeah, your Romanian author, in 1956, that there are two modalities of being, of course you know that, in the world. So in every human being, the sacred or the primitive, called Homo religiosus, and the modern or profane human being. The profane human being does not give meaning to the word or to death, whereas the Homo religiosus is integrated into a religion. The symbol, the myth, the rites allow them to see death as a passage. Mircea Eliade observes that there is no such thing as pure profanity. So I will quote him. Okay, I don't know how many minutes I still have. So no matter how far he has desecrated the word, the human being who has opted for a secular life does not succeed in abolishing religious behavior. It will be seen that even the most desacralized existence still retains traces of a religious valorization of the world. These are the words of Eliade. Human beings' religious behavior is natural to him, so even if he decides to get rid of all rituals, even if he considers himself an atheist and denies any idea of being or of a sacred object, he keeps his religious behavior. This manifests itself through ritualized attitudes that he practices in arts or sports, for example, but often without knowing this. So the majority of, this is the quote also from Mr. Eliade, yes? The majority of non-religious still behave religiously without their knowledge. It's only a question of the mass of superstitions or taboos of modern human beings, all of which have a magical religious structure and origin. Modern human being who feels and claims to be religious still has a whole camouflaged mythology and many degraded ritualism. Generally, human being unconsciously adopts a religious-oriented behavior through rituals and belief that he does not necessarily see as religious. Eliade gives examples such as the celebration of the New Year, a wedding, the birth of a child, social promotion, etc. So this to establish that these solemnities reveal the structure of a rite or of renewal. In short, this human specificity of transforming belief, of using it in all areas of life, is also qualified by Wittgenstein as a ceremoniality. He describes the human being as a ceremonial animal, since it is impossible for him not to attribute meaning to his actions. The second part, and the last part of my talk, is about the making belief. So we talk about belief, then how we cannot escape religious belief or religious behavior. This part, how is belief used and becoming instrumentalized? So we often believe that when motivations lead us to action or commitment, our belief in the perfection of the authority in which we have placed our hopes will always remain intact. However, if we think that our belief is permanently at the basis of our behavior and our ritual, that it participates unchanged in authority or doctrine, we are mistaken, because we risk locking ourselves or our beliefs into forms of manipulation. So the institution prevails over belief. It could exhaust its content. Michel de Certeau is a French philosopher that I like a lot. So he writes that through its own technocratic development, the institutional treatment of belief excludes what it claimed to manage, and that the ability to make belief visible in a language earns institutions the power and seduction they exercise over us. So maybe here you can see that how the political institution or other kind of institution will take over our beliefs. Beliefs escape us, we cannot control them. Institutions use language of seduction to manipulate their members into believing what they want, believing being the basis of an action, a practice, or an institution adherence, it's expressed and oriented into several ways. When it's instituting and defines the framework, it's the authority of believing or believing in an authority, whereas it is instituted in dogmas and narratives. It's the doctrine of believing or believing in doctrines. Okay? But beliefs establish content, appeal to attract believers, but also risk being manipulated by these institutions, by these authorities. The scientist, the politician, the priest, they give a speech whose language could become imaginary, but also seductive and even credible for those who need to believe that these representatives provide them with magical solutions. We have many examples like that in the Middle East. Maybe we can discuss or talk about them later. Expressing himself as an authority in the name of a doctrine with the aim of seducing, manipulating, making believe, and attracting believers, followers, and practitioners, the scientist risks moving away from rigor. The politicians risk moving away from his duties, and the priest from his mission. Speech is a dangerous means that can be used in order to please believers and ensure the credibility of the discourse by pretending to meet their needs. The objective is to make them do something. Just as believing implies an act, making believe also implies a doing. Thus, we realize that in some institutions, and particularly the political institutions, supporters who believe in the word of their leader vote for him from election to election, even if the data and the real facts contradict his words. We were talking about this yesterday together. So they usually vote for the same representative by virtue of an unwavering belief in their leader, because they are convinced that he will save them, even if he doesn't. The institution of believing manipulates belief in order to form a society that believes and gives credit to this person. So the society manipulates her subject or its subject and destabilizes them to make them believe that she loves them and that she is meeting their need for insecurity. So also this institution makes them believe that its function is only enunciation, enunciating doctrines, practices, but which makes her innocent of her actions and relieves the institution of any responsibility, since officially this institution is only a delegate, like a delegate of the family, of the church, of the political party. In addition, the institution manipulates the content of belief according to a precise spatio-temporal framework in order to retain its followers. When the content of beliefs seems to be questioned and the motivation to believe is no more, new motivations are created. For example, if you get bored of of believing in something, this institution will create new motivations, new kind of belief, to make me believe or to make us believe and make us do something. The institution then risks falling into the trap of transforming itself into an ideology, an extremist party, a fanatical organization. The manipulation of belief modifies its essence. The fact that believing is manipulable reveals the danger of its irreducibility. In conclusion, believing is first and foremost in the individual, who always prays to existential questions and is naturally inclined to adopt behavior that correspond to the institutional modalities of society, such as with the example we already gave, sports, democracy, other organizations. By analyzing human beings' religious behavior, we can understand the permanence of believing. However, the ritual act, ceremony, or practice is not solely the responsibility of the individual. These behaviors are necessarily inscribed in a society and expressed in an institution of belief. When I say institution of belief, it can be a political institution, not only a religious one. It can be, like we said before, another organization, sports, democracy. Human beings belonging to this institution and its ritual commitment are part of the institutional response to the need to believe. The existence of belief endures regardless of the instituted forms it takes, and the role of its elements reconfirms its importance in any society. As for religion, even if it persists, it is less structuring than before. Its limits are less defined, losing authority and power. It's no longer the same institutional model as it was before. It is weakened. And that shows that how the religious modality or the modalities of belief can be found in other institutions that are not called so-called religious institutions. And that's, for me, the kind of instrumentalization of belief. Thank you for your listening.